Okay, quick warning, there is some upsetting details in this story, so just a little warning. She said it's too much blood and gore, we're becoming a joke. He said that's the way the media is moving, you need to go with it. She said fine, I will. You watch me. What happens when the world you've spent years living in begins to change and you're not on board with that change? What's the most outrageous thing you could do? To take a stance, to make a point and be heard. We suffer at our sense of loss. We are frightened by her rage. We are guilty in the face of her rejection. We are hurt by her choice. We are hurt by her isolation. And we are confused by her message. She said it's too much blood and gore. He said, go with it. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Thank you if you've been in touch since the last episode. I've had lots of lovely emails, lots of lovely messages. I'll just do a wee quick couple of hellos. So, Angeline McC, you've got a story for me, so thank you very much for getting in touch with that. And for just for starting your message, my darling Baz, which, it's always nice. Makes me smile, Thank you. Terry McGrady, hello, and thanks for calling me Berry in the message. I love me some being called Berry. I do love it. And Matt Maruzio, what a name, from Melbourne. G'day, mate. Hi, Matt. And finally, Kells DC, who recently joined the Facebook group and is up to episode 115. Right, come on, slow coach. By the time you hear this, I'll be on to the episode 180. Get moving, come on. I'm putting you on a strict diet of extraordinary stories only. You're not allowed any other media. Of course, I'm kidding. Alright, that was the hellos I wanted to do. I'm good to go with the story. Okay, babes, if you're ready, I am. Okay, let's go. (1944), when Margaretha and George Chubbuck meet and get married and start a family. I just have to pause and say, Margaretha. Margaretha. Is someone taking the piss? That's like 14 names in one. She goes by Peg. I mean, I'd do the same. Can you imagine it? Hi, my name's Margaretha. Sorry, did you say Margaret? No, it's Margaretha. Sorry, did you say Aretha? No, it's... Oh, fuck it, just call me Peg. I can see why. Anyway, Just Call Me Peg and her husband George, they have 3 children. 2 boys, 1 girl. So the boys are older. That's Tim and Greg. And their daughter is Christine. Now the kids are sent to school in Ohio, Cleveland to be specific. And there's not a great deal to say about their school life. The boys get on fine. They go all the way through school. Everything's great. The parents' focus is really more on Christine, their daughter. And why they need to focus on her slightly more is her behaviour at school. Christine is, from a young age, smart, opinionated, but she's not like a lot of other kids. She doesn't display a lot of the same behaviours as some of the kids around her. From her very, very young years, Christine has a razor sharp focus on whatever she's doing. You know, that could be anything from learning an instrument, reading a book. Now, as soon as she's done that thing, she grows restless until she's got the next thing to do. When she got to her teenage years, she was, and I am generalising here, but she didn't go through that sort of lazy teenager, I can't be bothered type phase. She was really driven. She was really focused on action all the time. But something else. She was constantly sad. From a very young age, Christine was sad. And that was what her family, that was the word they used to describe it. They didn't really have another word. Perhaps the language wasn't quite there yet, but this was, late 50s, early 60s. She was young, and I guess they called it the blues. That sounded like, no joke, like I was going to burst into the Elton John song. I wasn't. That was just a pure accident. I didn't mean that. So her mum takes her to the doctor at one point, and they do give her a term for it. They call it general depression. And so Christine would have phases of this, and her family would try to get her to talk. Sometimes she would, sometimes she wouldn't. They were a close family, so really more often than not she would talk about it, but there were times when she just wanted to be on her own. She just wanted to take herself away and not let people know what was going on in her head. So she's going to school as a teenager, and she forms a little club, and it's a club of girls her age. Teenage girls who christen themselves the Dateless Wonder Club. And this was spearheaded by Christine. And these were the girls who couldn't get dates on a Saturday night, and they had to spend it home alone, and they never got asked to school dances, and boys never came round to their house to pick them up. And so this little club was Christine's way of owning it, being it, and not hiding from it. So her and a couple of other girls, they were the Dateless Wonder Club. And they got together on Saturday nights because they didn't have boys to go out with. This is going to be really important to Christine's story as we go on. So the depression and the not having a boyfriend, that's what dominates a lot of her teenage years. Now, that said, what she did still have was a good focus for work. When she wasn't feeling down and she was able to get on with things, like I said, she was smart as a whipped ice cream. So, education-wise, she goes to a university in Ohio, she goes to a college in Massachusetts, and finally she ends up at Boston University, where she gets a degree in broadcasting. You see, what Christine wanted to do was work as a broadcaster, a journalist. You know, I've said it before, journalism is what I should have done. It really is. That's a mistake. Well, it's not too late, I suppose. Well, yeah, maybe. No, it's not. But honestly, that's what I should have done rather than farming. Farming was the wrong choice for me. Anyway, you live your life, you learn your lessons. Right, so to begin with, she gets an assistant producer's job out of her studies. And she gets this at a local Ohio TV station. And she does well. She really likes this job. TV appeals to her. And what she really likes is human interest stories. She really likes to get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening with people, the reality of things. You know, find out what's interesting, what makes people tick. This is Christine's kind of thing. Now she's doing this work and it's going well. This is, you know, one of her kind of first jobs. That's fine. She's going to go on to some bigger things in her career. But before that, there's going to be a few things in her personal life which will change. Firstly, she's still suffering from depression. And whilst she's talking about it with her family, she keeps it out of her work life entirely. She chooses not to tell any of her colleagues or her boss that she gets depressed. I guess it's a fear. I mean, I'm guessing, but I think it's a fear that it might somehow affect her chances of progressing within work. For whatever reason, Christine decides she's just going to keep it in the family. Now, in her early 20s, she starts seeing a therapist, and she will see a therapist for many years to come. Now, although at high school she'd started the Dateless Wonder Club, into her adulthood, her trouble with relationships continues. It continues to really be a factor in her life. She can't seem to connect with people for very long, or she finds it very difficult to start relationships with people. It takes a long time for her to find someone that she might be interested in, and then when she does find them, she doesn't know how to connect with them, and this kind of, I don't want to say narrative, but this almost narrative she did start when she was a teenager about being dateless has now carried in to her adult life. However, there is a brief period where this changes, and she does date someone for a brief period. She manages to fight through the difficulties that she finds in making connections, and she's in her early 20s and she finds a man who's a bit older than her, and they're in a relationship. It's feeling good, and then tragedy strikes. This man dies in a horrible car crash accident. Horrible. So, like I said, she's only in her early 20s, and that's a lot to deal with. So what does Christine do to cope? Well, she befriends the other person who was involved in the car crash and who has survived. She doesn't know this other person, this man. He's a stranger. He was just in the other car. It just so happens he survived when her boyfriend didn't. Now, this man has a long road of physical recovery ahead of him, and Christine joins him on that journey. She attends the hospital where he's relearning to walk, getting his life back together, and she makes herself a huge part of his recovery. That's her way of dealing with the death of her boyfriend. She gets to know what he needs, she gets to know the man really well, and it helps her to heal a bit from the shock and the trauma. Christine is a very, very private person, and people will say that they find her hard to read. People will say she's, I hate this word, brusque. Is that right? Am I saying that right? Brusque? I always thought that's how you describe somebody's moustache. I thought you would always say, look at that gentleman, doesn't he have a brusque moustache? But anyway, this is the word I keep seeing in relation to Christine. Brusque? Is that how you say it? I don't know how you say it. Offish, cold, sharp. These are the kinds of words that people use to describe her. But I think that comes from the fact that, like we've talked about, she did struggle to form relationships with other people, but also she was private. She was focused, and she was depressed, and sometimes she just took herself away. She took herself away from other people. So all of that adds up to this kind of, Christine's quite a tough person to get to know, and, you know, even her sort of colleagues and people around her would say, she's quite a difficult one, she's a tricky one. It's how people talk about me, it's what they say about me. I'm kidding, of course they don't. I'm a right friendly Freddy, kind of shut me up. Well, I've no idea why I'm telling you that, because you know. Anyway, Christine's got some big changes in her personal life and her work life ahead. Now in her mid-20s, she's going to move out of the family home in Ohio, and she's going to move into the family home in Florida. You see, the family have a summer home in Florida, and Christine decides she's going to make this her house. So, as an adult, her parents divorce, but she's still quite connected to her family. She's still good relationships with them. So what she does is she moves into the Florida family home, and then over time her mother comes to live there and her brothers come to live there. So essentially they've just really moved family home from Ohio to Florida, except it feels slightly different because it's been Christine's choice to move here. And so it's weird because it's kind of seen as Christine's house, the one in Florida. You know, it's almost like it's her house and her mum and her brothers just happen to live with her. But this is by her design. It's because she wants her family around her, which is nice. A little tight family unit. And when she's with her family, she can open up about her depression, but also something else. Her suicidal thoughts. Of course, these are exceptionally difficult to share, but she does. And what her family advise is to keep seeing her therapist and to tell her therapist about these thoughts. At one point, her mum asks her to tell her colleagues, tell other people who you work with around you what's going on. Let them in to the fact that you're depressed and that sometimes you have suicidal thoughts. But Christine just won't even entertain that idea. She just won't do it. Her mum thinks, should she do it? Should she call Christine's boss and say, look, just to let you know, she's very depressed and sometimes she has these thoughts. But she thinks against it because she worries that Christine will be denied future opportunities. So in 1969, she joins a TV station called WXLT/TV, and it's based in Florida. Now when she joins, at first it's as a reporter, but before very long, the boss of the TV station, this man, he thinks, she's got promise. She has something interesting about her. He likes the kind of stories that she wants to report on. You know, he likes her kind of style and he thinks maybe she should be on camera. Rather than reporting and writing, actually, let's get her on the camera. So this is a really cool, great opportunity for Christine. He creates a morning show called the Suncoast Digest, which is like a community affairs show. And Christine is the face of it. But not just the face of it, she also gets to write for it. She chooses the stories. She chooses the guests. It's real human interest stories. It's the real people of Florida. It's what's happening in the community, and that's all the stuff that she likes. So she starts this, and it goes well. It's a popular show, 9 a.m. every morning. She's there to talk about something interesting. She gets to meet the locals. She has people in the studio. Sometimes she's on location. It's great. The sort of the sort of way that the studio describe it, I think this is quite a nice little way to describe it. They describe her show as the lost segments of the community. Meaning that, it could range from anything. She could be interviewing shop owners one day about the decline of something, and then she's, interviewing people on the street the next day, and then she could have doctors in the studio. Everyone and anyone. Now the show's going well, and the TV station is an affiliate of the ABC network. So who knows? This could lead to big things for Christine. And she's doing, like I said, a great job running this morning show. Now, we discussed already problems with relationships. And in the workplace, around this TV show, things don't really fare much better for her. There's a small team of people that she works with regularly. She gets to know them over the years. But if they're asked about Christine, they'll say she's distant and she's isolated. And I feel like isolated is a good word here. I feel like that's the word actually I'm searching for when I'm trying to describe her. It seems from like all the descriptions that I can pull together, the thing with Christine was she would be there, she would be chatting, but she still felt isolated from everything. And that, can be a symptom of depression. And she's still facing that on a daily basis. Now, what's not going to help here is that she starts to develop feelings for a co-worker named George. Let's just talk about George. George was a smooth-talking, handsome, quick-witted TV anchorman. And Christine and him, they got along very well. She liked his sense of humour. She liked how kind of slick he was. Yeah, he was interesting to Christine. Now, she starts to develop these feelings, and not having many close friends, or really any close friends, that she can confide in, there's only one other person that she can talk to about this. And that's someone called Andrea. And Andrea is the weather reporter for the TV station. Christine and Andrea, they've worked together for a couple of years now, and they've become something like friends, I suppose. So Christine tells Andrea that she likes George and that she's planning to ask George, the smooth anchorman, out on a date. And George has an upcoming birthday, and there's going to be a party. So Christine is really looking forward to the party, and you know why? Because she's baked George a cake. Brilliant. I don't know if that's how you woo people. Maybe that's where I've been going wrong all these years. If you fancy someone, bake them a cake. Is that a tactic? Is that what people do? I don't know. Anyway, she makes George a cake. She's very excited. She goes to the party. She tells Andrea, her friend, that she's going to tell George how she feels about him. But Christine is about to be in for a crushing disappointment. She discovers at the party that George is dating someone. He's dating Andrea, Christine's friend. And Andrea never said a word. That's shit, isn't it? That is really bad. I feel so bad for Christine. She's gone to the one friend that she has and said, I really like this guy. And this friend is actually seeing this guy and doesn't say to her. So this is a real blow for Christine. Pretty quickly after this, George discovers that he's been headhunted to go to Baltimore to a TV station, and he takes weather presenter and former friend Andrea with him, leaving Christine completely alone. Not a great time for Christine. I mean, not great for anyone, but I think especially if you have difficulty in even starting relationships, that's tough. Also, she trusted Andrea, and look how that turned out. So, to pile on even more pressure, during all of this, Christine has had a visit to the doctor, and the doctor has told her that she needs to get one of her ovaries removed. So this happens, and as part of this process, she's told by doctors that if she doesn't have children in the next 2 to 3 years, it's likely that she'll never conceive. At this point, she's only 28 years old. She's been doing this TV show for about 3 years now, and her boss begins to tell her that he wants different kind of stories on her show. I don't know if you've ever heard of this phrase. I had never heard it until I came across this story, and I absolutely hate it. I hate that it's going to come out my mouth, but this was apparently what was really big in the media at the time, and it's this: if it bleeds, it leads. What a horrible phrase. What it means, this phrase, is that if a story has blood and guts and death and true crime, then that's the lead story. Now, this was not Christine's thing. She was not into all of this horrible blood and guts stuff. She did not want those kind of news stories to be dominating her morning show. But the bosses at the TV station are telling her, if it bleeds, it leads, because that's what gets ratings. That's what pulls people in these days. No one's interested in nice community stories anymore. We want blood and guts. Like I say, not her thing. Well, let me tell you this: Christine would not be a fan of Netflix or the podcast charts, because it's all true crime and blood and guts. That's all it ever is. So she really pushes back against this, against her bosses. She's just like, no, I don't. These are not the stories I want to tell. And they push back towards her and say, if you want to keep this segment, this is what you're going to have to do, because this is what other stations are doing. They're seeing good ratings. We need to keep up. It's a competitive market. This just causes a lot of strain. He's saying, we need ratings. She's saying, fine, why does it all need to be shootings, stabbings, murders? He's saying that's what people want. Now, she carries on with her show. She does the segments she wants to do. But what she starts to do is act out a little bit, sometimes just during interviews. She'll ask guests awkward questions, like questions about sex live on air. And she'll make passive-aggressive statements like, well, the more graphic you can be, the better. After all, that's what the station wants. Now, for this kind of behaviour, she does get into trouble a few times, but they don't take her show away from her. They like her. The viewers at home like her, but she is, given a good sort of telling off for it. But she's still pushing back and saying she won't be made to do the type of stories that they want. And it's just causing this awful atmosphere to work in. But remember, Christine is not a pushover. However, she's also aware she would like to keep her job. So, one day she goes to her boss and she pitches an idea for a segment on her show. She asks if she can get a suicide expert to come in and she will interview them. Now, the station are reluctant. They want ratings, but a suicide expert, they're like, is this going to work? Not sure. So they think about it. She tells them it is a good idea. It kind of covers a bit of that blood, guts, gore that you want. And eventually they go, right, okay, fine. And they agree. So she gets an expert on from the police department. And Christine interviews him all about suicide. Different methods. Different examples. And she asks all sorts. But the $1 million question she asks is this. What is the most effective way to do it? What's the most effective way to kill yourself? He describes in detail, live on air, how you shoot yourself in the back of the head, at the bottom of your skull, just behind your ear, and how this will give you maximum impact. The interview finishes and it's been a risky one, but ultimately her bosses are happy. It feels like it's more hard hitting. It feels like it's right for the station. So in the weeks after this particular interview, she keeps being pushed to cover stories about shootings and violence, and she relents a little bit. She starts to give in and do some more of these stories, but all the time a plan is forming in Christine's mind. July 15th, 1974. Christine arrives at the station as usual for her morning broadcast, and she sits down at a typewriter. She's writing her morning script. Except this morning, it's a little different. She's going to open with some news. And then she's going to play some footage of a shooting which had happened just the week before. Now, the first thing that's odd about this is that Christine didn't really do the news in her slot. Occasionally, she would cover it if someone was off. She would go in and cover the news, but leading with the news, that wasn't really her thing. However, at the station, no one really raises that much of an eyebrow because they trust Christine. They always have. She's good, and if she wants to do something a little different that morning, then that's fine. So she types up the script, she hands it to the crew, and she tells the operator she wants the footage of the shooting from the week before to be ready. This is all quite easy. This is all quite standard. So she steps onto set just before 9 AM. She sits down at the anchor desk and she places a bag under the desk. broadcast begins, live to the people of Florida. Thousands are watching from their home, and the whole studio team are in live mode. Okay, we're live on TV. Christine gives the headlines. She covers the news stories, and then she says, and now we're going to go to some footage of a local shooting from last week. But that doesn't happen. The tape jams. The operator can't get the footage to play. So he's signalling from behind the camera to Christine that the video she wants isn't going to play. So there's a moment where Christine just stares into the camera whilst they're frantically trying to fix it, but it's not going to happen. The tape has completely jammed. It won't play. But no worries. Christine is a professional. So because the tape has jammed, they're going to have to skip to the next thing that she's typed up on her script. And when they look at it, their mouth opens in horror when they realise what she's typed next on the script. Live on TV, Christine reaches under the desk. She gets something from the bag. She faces the camera and she says, in keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts and in living colour, you are going to see another first, an attempted suicide. Christine puts a gun behind her right ear and shoots herself live on TV. There's a puff of smoke from the gun, and for a second her head moves from the impact of the bullet, and then she slumps onto the anchor desk. Her hair falls over her head. The entire crew freeze. If they had read ahead in her script properly, they would have seen that Christine had written this moment before she went on air. In the script, it says, Christine removes gun from bag and shoots herself. And now she has. What's below that on the script that she's written is the words that she wants someone else to speak. She has written this. TV14 News personality Christine Chubbuck shot herself in a live broadcast this morning on a Channel 40 talk programme. She was rushed to Sarasota Memorial Hospital, where she remains in critical condition. She wrote that an hour before the live TV broadcast started. In a panic, the operator is screaming that the camera needs to fade to black, and it does. Slowly. It fades on Christine's body, slumped on the desk. The thousands of people watching at home have no idea what they've just seen. Christine is rushed to hospital, and 14 hours later she dies, aged 29. What an absolutely brutal end to a very short life. In the days that follow this, there's panic, there's confusion, there's anger. How could this happen? How could someone get away with committing suicide live on TV? So many questions, so many thoughts. And then There's interviews with absolutely everyone who ever knew her. You know, suddenly all the people who were aware of, oh, that woman who does the 9 a.m. show suddenly needed to know everything about Christine. Her mother gives an interview, and I think she says some quite interesting things. She says, Christine had no close friends, no romantic attachments, or no prospects of any. She was a spinster at 29 and it bothered her. She just couldn't register with people. That's the main thing. She was very sensitive and she would try to reach out to people, but she struggled with personal relationships and it really got to her. Christine had been very depressed. She'd been seeing a psychiatrist who really didn't feel that she was serious about not wanting to live. She felt if you tried as hard as you can, you prepared yourself, you worked hard, you reach your hand out to people, sometimes nobody takes it. And then you realise there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with your drumbeat. And that's what she really felt. She just couldn't register with anyone except us, her family. And at 29 years old, that's sad. That's what her mum had to say about her. The footage from that last day is taken by the studio and immediately it's locked away. Now, those who saw it live, they can't unsee it, but the studio want to make sure that no one ever sees it again. 2 weeks later, her funeral takes place on a Florida beach, and her ashes are scattered to the Gulf of Mexico. Now back to that footage. The TV company and the family, they end up in a bitter argument over possession of the footage. The family feel like they should have the footage. After all, Christine was their family. I think the TV company are worried that it's going to end up in the wrong hands. They don't know where it's going to end up. So it goes back and forth, but the sort of latest rumour on it really, I mean, this happened in the 70s, but the latest rumour is that the president of the ABC network took the footage and that he locked it up at home and that it was only ever him and his wife who knew where it was, and it's been guarded, locked away for years, and that it will never see the light of day. Some really horrific suicide websites, you know, the ones that glorify suicide, well, they consider the footage of Christine killing herself on TV the holy grail of suicide videos, but it's never surfaced. And although it really pains me to say it, that is the short and the very tragic life of Christine Chubbuck, the only person to ever kill themselves live on TV. I think what's really interesting here is this idea about blood and guts and the if it bleeds it leads angle, and kind of what that move at the time in the 70s meant about TV culture and what that means now. I suppose I was thinking about kind of the things that we're exposed to now, the things we see, and yeah. The other thing is I had a very hard time with this story. I'll not go on about this forever, but you know what was really interesting here was I did a lot of research about what the story was, and then I found a really interesting interview with her mum, and you already heard her mum's words there. You know, her mum will say she was sad. It was about the fact she couldn't find love. She couldn't connect with people and make these things, and that's why she killed herself. And it's so interesting because her brother, who's still alive, will say he hates when people tell Christine's story and they focus entirely on that. He says it wasn't that. She killed herself because of her depression and because she didn't like the way that the media was changing and she couldn't cope with that. And I'm not telling Christine's story to sensationalise it or, for any kind of shock factor. I just think it's such an interesting story about someone being driven to do something that they could have done in private if they were going to do it. If she'd had years of these suicidal thoughts, why take it live on TV? Something so interesting there. So that's where the difficult bit of the story comes from, because I didn't want to take it too far down the, she was, some broken hearted woman who couldn't find a man story. As her brother says, don't paint her as that. And I wouldn't want to paint her as that, not in the slightest. I do think it's probably maybe a bit of a factor, but I don't think it's her whole story. I think the time and depression and treatment of depression. And again, of course, you always get this, and I don't really know how much faith I put in these, but all the theories now are, if it was now, she would have been diagnosed as bipolar. Well, I don't have the evidence to say that that's true or it's not true, so I'm not going to say that I believe that. It's just that's one of those things that you'll read about her, just in case you do want to, or you want to look up her story. But yeah, interesting. Her brother is the one who spoke those words that I said at the very beginning, so I think I'll just repeat those at the end, because I do think that they are an interesting way to bring Christine's story to an end. He said, "We suffer at our sense of loss. We are frightened by her rage. We are guilty in the face of her rejection. We are hurt by her choice, by her isolation. We are confused by her message." And so ends the story. Okay, there you go. That was the story for this episode. So, I am out of here. If you want to get in touch, you've got thoughts, ideas, comments, get in touch. You can do that on any of the social media platforms. Be nice to hear what you think. And yeah, okay. Until we speak again, okay. Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.